Hey guys, and welcome to the March 2026 edition of the IgniteCast. I'm excited to be here with you today. My name is Kevin Beasley. If you don't know me, most of you probably do. And we have a really exciting episode today because of a number of reasons. One is we have four people on the episode. So we've never done four people before. So I'm excited for that. Unfortunately, Dan is actually currently in Israel, which I'm sure that we all wish we were there. But Dan is leading a trip in Israel right now, so he's not with us this month. But we are excited to have a long-term Ignite partner. I would call him partner, an Ignite partner with us today, and Jim Richmond. And Jim has been around since almost the beginning and has set such a beautiful example and has been a model for all of us coming behind in the Ignite network and how to do this. And so, Jim, I'm excited that you're here today. And hey, for those who may be just joining us this month for the first time or the last few months, why don't you share a little bit, Jim, about who you are and what Ignite has meant for you over the years?
The Ignite network has drastically changed it's changed what I cared about. Obviously, that's step one. But no, way back in probably 2011, maybe 2012. I think it was 2011, to be honest with you. We went to a boot camp after starting an attractional church, and it was very heavily influenced by the missionary church. It really wasn't an Ignite event per se, and so we got this heavy dose of, hey, if you're not laying this disciple making foundation, this multiplying disciple foundation, then you're going to get stuck in this chasm, right? Like, you're starting these public environments where people are coming to faith, but then how long does it take for them to really actually start reproducing their faith? And I mean, we just started evaluating and thinking, man, we know Christians that have sat through small groups and sermons for 30 years and they've never led anybody else. And so we were beginning to see that the original crew that wanted to start the church really was passionate about reaching other people. We never advertised. We didn't think that was, we told the church, hey, you're helping us start a church because you're wanting to reach our community, and if you're not going to actually actively be outreaching our community, this thing's not going to grow. So we kind of, that's the one thing we kind of did right. But we really put a lot of emphasis on that. If we have a cooler environment, if we suck less, then it's going to make that invitation so much easier. There's going to be people wanting to flock to come to our church, and it worked okay. But what we were seeing was we were reaching one generation disciples. They weren't multiplying at all, and it was just the perfect timing. God worked it out. That about 3 years into doing that, we were ready to have that aha moment that this is not multiplying. This is like, we're coming to the end of the original crew reaching the people that they can reach, and the new people aren't reaching anybody, and they don't have the same passion that the original crew did. And so we went back and we just started like thinking all summer, like, how are we going to do this? We came up with a bunch of really terrible plans. And then Dan Grider said, hey, we have this thing called Xcellerate. And I was like, man, it sure would have been nice to know that after we put about 3 months of work into coming up with these bad plans. And so we were on the very beginning. He had already been leading it there with One Life in Knoxville. But then we began to lead and Xcellerate that fall. In Johnson City, Upper East Tennessee area above Knoxville. And we were fortunate because we got to watch Dan do it and take a lot of notes. But now I look at the system that we have in place and the people that I talk to across the network, and man, they are so much better prepared to lead this thing than I was. Even though Dan was coming up, like, the system that we have in place right now is so good. And so we have, slowly retrofitted a tractional church. And then slowly, as we've started more and more churches, tried to make sure that the foundation was that from the start. And they say about 10 years in that even church plants lose their effectiveness when it comes to evangelism and things like that. And it's just so exciting to see that 17, 18 years in, it's actually the opposite because of the foundation that we're laying now. So it's been a fun journey. And I tell you, it is, like I said, so exciting to be listening to the people all around the network and what God is doing. And I'm just jealous sometimes because so many of you are getting such better starts than we got because you're just so prepared when you jump into it with Ignite 1, 2, 3, 4 that you're going through before you jump into it. So just it's so exciting to see what God's doing for us, but really more exciting to see what God's doing all around the network.
That's so cool. We had Justin on last month, and he's a disciple of yours, and it was so cool to listen to him. One of the things that's been super exciting for me to recognize with your network is how you're really utilizing those different gifts of the APEST and finding your lane. Like, for example, I mean, technically, you're not even a campus pastor anymore, right? Which is an apostolic work, is you've stepped out of that shepherd teacher role, and so that you can like really focus in on the apostolic work of your network, and you put people like Justin in place who's gifted in different ways to fill some gaps. So that's my passion, is building teams around this thing and not just letting them be personality driven and charismatically driven. So it's been beautiful. Good job. Thanks for being a model and paving the way for a lot of the other ones of us that are doing this. So, and thanks for being with us today. And just to give you kind of an overview, what we decided to do the first 4 months of the IgniteCast of 2026 is walk through 4 quadrants of what we call the Civil War Campfire, which we introduced back at the retreat in November. And so January, we went through quadrant 1, and if you think Dan kind of set this up to be like the Hebrew day planner. So I don't have the graphic. Dan is actually in Israel, I think, still right now. So he's leading a team in Israel, and I don't have the original graphic. But in your mind, just kind of imagine a clock, and from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock is the phase of the Civil War Campfire, which we've talked about several times. But in case this is your first time to be with us, I will kind of lay out real quickly the overview of, like, imagine yourself, what would happen in the Civil War is the soldiers would go out to the front line and fight hard all day long. 10, 12 hours. They would just, as long as it was daylight, they were fighting, sometimes hand-to-hand combat. They fought the Civil War a lot differently from how wars are fought, at least generally today. There are wars in the world fought like this, but I mean, it was a lot of times hand-to-hand, like just point blank, right, face to face. And they would fight hard. And then as they were finishing out their day, there were some people that were back around the Civil War campfire that was preparing for the soldiers to come back in from a long, hard day's battle. And they would do things like cook food and prepare ammunition for rearming the troops, and be ready with medics so that they could take care of the troops as they were coming in off the field, and take really good care of them throughout quadrants 2. So if you think of quadrant 1 is the bottom, is 3 to 6 o'clock on an analog clock, and that starts about sundown. Then after the triage and the roll call and the health care and the stopping of the bleeding and all the emergency care, then they would go into the second half of the nighttime around the campfire, where they would be secure. They didn't have to worry about an enemy coming up behind them, because there were probably and our guest today can tell us more about this. So probably security guards kind of around on the outside perimeter of the camp, making sure the enemy didn't come in. So there was a sense of safety and security, and they would allow the soldiers to reflect on the day and talk about their stories of the day, talk about what they saw happening on the field. And then they would spend the last portion of that bottom half of the clock from 3 to 9 o'clock, at least on the analog clock, not literally, with sleeping and resting and taking care of their bodies and their minds and their emotions and souls. And then what we're going to talk about today goes into the third segment of the Civil War campfire, is when they wake up in the morning. So we're looking on an analog clock from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, where they have had a good night's rest, they've been taken care of, they've had a chance to tell their stories, they've been triaged. We know who's missing and who never made it back on the battlefield. And we're waking up in the morning, and now we're getting them prepared to go back to the mission field. And I've been using this Civil War campfire analogy. It actually came, as I've said before, from a mentor of mine named Greg Getz, who lives in Indiana. we worked together to kind of invent this word picture for what it means to cyclically gather and scatter as a discipling network. So that's kind of what we do. We send people to the mission field. They're on the mission field, depending on if you have Sunday church or some other form of a church. We send them to the mission field about 6 days a week, 6.5 days a week, and then we gather them together to do this campfire thing. So that's why we're using this word analogy, or word picture. So I'm super excited about our guests today, Rich and Eli, both from Clarksville, from the Jesus Pattern Network. They've been part of Ignite about the same amount of time that I have. So let me bring Rich in first. Rich, we met each other. We actually rode together to the Ignite retreat, which is super interesting, riding 4 hours in the car together, first time you meet, right? Never have really met before. So what has been your story about being part of the Ignite Network?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for having us on. Our story with Ignite really began with a transition from, that environment that Jim was talking about earlier, maybe more of an attractional church. And our heart had always been toward helping the people that are farthest away from Jesus find a way to him. And we just, felt like to do that, we had to move out and start our own network here in the place where we live, and that's where we connected with Dan and began to learn some new tools from him, just how to have conversations, how to train people to have conversations, how to incorporate Xcellerate into what we do. So that was really, beneficial for us to be connected with Dan right about the same time we were in this place of launching out this network that we call the Jesus Pattern Network.
Mm. And you can find that at thejesuspattern.com if you want to dig in a little bit more, and make sure you put the in there, thejesuspattern.com.
Yeah.
And then one of your early disciples, I don't know if y'all consider more side by side, or you're a disciple maker of Eli. I know Eli was already along the journey, but Eli came along somewhere. So Eli, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how you came into the Jesus Pattern and what Ignite's meant for you.
Yep. Thank you, Kevin, for having us on today. We really appreciate it. It's been a good journey between Rich and myself. We met in the church that Rich was connected with, and we were there as a family. And somewhere in the process, my wife and I had been challenged, I think, by the Spirit to think about discipling and discipleship in a different way. We didn't have the language for it at the time, but we just knew that the things we were doing just didn't seem to match up with what we were seeing in Scripture. And we were so engaged and involved in the day-to-day of a local church and all the pieces with it. We just didn't have the capacity to be able to do more. So at some point in time along the way, about the time that Rich and his wife decided that it was time to move on to something else, we did also. And in the process, Rich discovered some resources that were really valuable in our journey. Some of the books that Dan has written were very helpful, and he was starting to share with me some of the things that he was learning from Dan, and then when he met you, from you. And it just resonated in my heart and my wife's heart, and we just kind of got engaged and involved. And Rich and I have been really good friends. I would call him a mentor, but also a partner in what we've been doing. And it's been really fun to think differently about how we engage in disciple making, how we think about what's success and what's not success, how we build capacity, how we try to eliminate distractions so that we actually have time to invest in people. And it's been a good journey, and Ignite has definitely been a crucial part for myself and my wife and our family.
So good. Rich, before we get started kind of on our content, share, if you don't mind, I didn't ask you to do this, so sorry, but could you share just a quick testimony of somebody that you're seeing transformed at the moment?
Oh, I was thinking about probably Josh is one of those folks. John is another one that Eli is connected with at the jiu-jitsu gym where he goes. Josh's story, he got connected through the gym, kind of through his wife. but he was part of the gym community for a while, and he's been on a kind of a private individual pursuit of truth for several years. But then when he got connected with our community, we just began to observe what God was doing. I can't really say that we had a lot to do, like we didn't have a whole lot of conversations. Just over one summer, this past summer, God saved him. And then, he began to connect with our community. And then, we've been walking alongside him when it comes to just the beginning steps of discipleship. And it's been a great learning experience for me personally, to work with someone who's more on the creative side. I'm definitely less creative, more regimented. And so just seeing him process getting into Scripture, decisions he's making about his priorities and his family. He one day he just said, "Hey, I want you to come over and bless my home. This home is going to be God's home, and I want to make sure that it's been blessed and consecrated." He probably wouldn't have used the word consecrated, but his point was it was a new start for him. And then just beginning to see him step out into obeying Jesus with all that he had. So it's been a joy to see him and others along the way just begin to connect with God, and in a way that I would say is spirit led. You know what I mean? There's nothing that we do that's attractional. So when people stick around, we know it's God. Isn't it? And I'm not knocking anything that may attract people and make Jesus attractive to folks. It's just kind of our environment.
Yeah, that's so good. One of the things I've learned, I'm celebrating this year. This is my 20th year doing this decentralized disciple making ministry, and one of the things I've learned over the years, actually, the old Henry Blackaby stuff taught us this, right? Is like, if you really want to be effective, just sit back and look for the activity of the Holy Spirit where God's already working, and then just slide in right beside the Holy Spirit and invest most of your time where you already see God working. And it reminds me of Dan's kind of two sides of the coin, two ways that you determine disciplability. One is they've gone through some really difficult life situation recently that tends to make people more disciplable. But the other side of the coin is you just see the natural activity of the Holy Spirit in their life, So, yeah, that's when we see a tremendous amount of fruit. I'd rather think that I did it all and catalyzed something to happen, but those usually fall flat on their face. So it's funny how it works. So cool. I'm excited about having you both here because you're military guys, and you're both retired military, and so you've been trained in a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. So I just talk about it because I imagine what it might be like, but you guys probably have a different kind of context on this. So that third quadrant, we're looking for some wisdom on how do we, as our troops have been rested up, have been secure, have been able to share the reports of the day, and then they've gotten their rest, and we're ready to send them back to the mission field. How do we rally them together? Which I think it was, but you guys gave me a term earlier. It might be something like a mission update. Rally them together to get ready to go back to the field. Feed them and nourish them to get physically ready for a long day on the battlefield. And then it's kind of like the mission update, refocus them, redirect them, and give them time to just prepare for going back out. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today. And I don't know, Jim, thoughts? Any thoughts on? I know you love to be put on the spot.
Now, first of all, I just want to say thanks to you, Kevin, for bringing this whole strategy to us, because I really feel like that for a lot of us, we're so focused on the mission, we're so focused on pushing people. I tend to be the type of person that it's like, well, that's great that we baptize more people than we've ever baptized. There's still, thousands of people going to hell. So we don't even have time to celebrate, and so that doesn't really make people feel like that I want to take the time to say, have you gotten beaten up in the process? How can I care for you? Are you getting what you need to get? And so I think for a lot of us, we're drawn to Ignite because we are so desperate to see the wins on the battlefield that sometimes we kind of overlook this whole realm. But I love this quadrant because I think it's natural for me to just already be thinking, hey, we're headed back out. We're headed back out. And so, to me, it feels like that our Xcellerate gatherings are really a place where, you're getting the mission, you're focused on, hey, here's what's next. And we're holding each other accountable. And I just think even when it comes to the mission or it comes to getting them fed, so much of it comes down to that accountability environment. And so much of what we do in churches doesn't really have any accountability. It's just we hope you'll show up. And that's what I love about this whole concept of it being military and being battlefield is there's a lot of accountability for you being everything that you're supposed to be and then making sure that you're ready and that kind of thing because you're the rest of the people around you need to know that you're ready. And so that accountability, I think, in all of these areas and just as much, especially in quadrant 3, I think is what really pushes this whole thing forward, whether it's them feeding, making sure that they're being fed or it's them being ready for the next step to go back out.
Man, that's so good. So good. And part of it we mentioned, kind of touched on earlier, is that you have learned how to put people in place to fulfill all of these functions, right? Like you recognize that you can't fulfill some of these quadrant functions. And so you have to find people to bring alongside you. You know where you do fit and you plug in those areas, but then you know where you can't fulfill and you bring people alongside you. And it's cool because you raise them up out of the mission field primarily, which is really beautiful. So Rich and Eli, either one of you guys could jump in, but share, we're super excited, like I said, that we got military guys. Share from a military perspective what you think about this third quadrant, whether it's disciple making or just how you've been trained.
What I think about is like being a good soldier of Jesus. That analogy or that way of thinking about what we do as being good soldiers applies to discipleship. I think about Ephesians 6. It talks about putting on the full armor of God. You've got to be equipped, and that's definitely a quadrant 3 type of activity. I think a difference between military activities and disciple making activities is it requires a lot of patience. You don't typically think of the work of a soldier being requiring patience. And I think for part of that equipping is realizing that when we go out onto the battlefield, we're not doing this in our strength. And we have to be observant. We have to see what's happening. And part of that preparation is just reminding ourselves like who we are. We are ambassadors of Jesus, being reacquainted with our identity. And because everything flows out of that. Because once we get honed in on our identity, now we can focus on our mission. There's a lot of different missions. We all have the same general mission, but Jim's mission at his church is going to be a little bit different than my mission. Eli, God has placed him in a jiu-jitsu gym. He's connecting there. I'm connecting at another gym across town. So I think we have to think about the work of God being very mission specific, where there's this balance of intentionality and patience coming together with the full armor of God as we prepare to move out. So those are just some initial thoughts on this quadrant for me.
Eli, you want to jump in?
Sure. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak into this. As we went to that conference last year, the idea of the Civil War campfire really resonated. Having a military background, your brain starts to think about different aspects. Like any other analogy or any other example, they break down at some point, but I think the big principles of them are really there. As I think about this, there's a few things that I think about as my wife and I were on the journey of kind of rethinking disciple making. One thing that I realized right along the way is the disciple making that I had been a part of in the past was very academic and educational focused and wasn't really experiential by nature. It was more of a racking up knowledge and not so much the experience. And I think that there's a balance between the two. And what I have learned is how important it is to think about people and to create environments where there's community and accountability. And one of the tools that I've learned through our journey, it's not something that we came up with. It's been called many different things. I call it the 3/3 principle, or looking back, looking up, and looking forward. And I think that has a really big part in what we're talking about because it kind of combines all these aspects of the campfire. Looking back is seeing what's going on with people, like actually figuring out what's going on, what's been a challenge, what's been a win, gathering intelligence, if you want to use the military term, so that we can make actionable decisions off of it. And so looking back is so important. But really, what I see in this quadrant is the looking up and the looking forward. So when we gather intelligence, when we learn what's going on, I think we need to do what Dan would call the just in time discipleship versus the just in case discipleship, where we're actually tailoring our connections with disciple makers to what's going on in their lives. And that's really learning to ask good questions. And as we look up to try to equip them for the next battle, we really need to look up in a way that's tailored to them so that they can actually digest what's been going on and figure out a path forward in their own instance. I think there are times where we can have some general things that are good for everybody, but every one of those has to be tailored. And then looking forward is really where the rubber meets the road. We've gathered the intelligence, we've made adjustments off our battle plans. Maybe we've added some new strategies or some new tools to the toolbox. But then we have to look forward and go, okay, what's next? And I think what happens a lot of times is if we get so wrapped up in things that have happened, we forget about the mission. And if you want to use the military aspect of it, the mission is always so important. They would say that you need a mission statement, you need the commander's intent, you need key tasks, and you need an end state. And if you have those, you can accomplish the mission. And if something changes, as long as you have those, you can make adjustments. And the way I've seen it is, the mission statement is to be like Jesus, to model ourselves after Jesus. And the commander's intent, Jesus said in John 20, he said, as the Father has sent me, I'm sending you. That's really the intent. And then the Great Commission, we see, those aspects of the key tasks: to go, to baptize, to teach people to obey. And then the end state is that Jesus is with us always. And so we got to continue to remind people of what the mission is. We need to make any adjustments we can based on the terrain or the enemy or, whatever you want to use for intelligence. And then we just have to keep encouraging people to go back out and to get back in the fight. That's kind of how I see the military aspect working with this principle, and maybe how I would see that quadrant 3, if that's helpful at all.
Man, so good. I was thinking about, one of the things we really try to focus on is function in the Ignite network versus form. So it's really cool because all of us on this call has different types of forms of gathering the troops together, rallying the troops together. Like I do, my big troop rallying is a quarterly all gathering where all of our simple churches get together. And at that all gathering, we don't really, we baptize, we hear stories and testimonies. We don't really do Bible study there because it's usually a large gathering that's hard to do. But I vision cast, I know back when I was in my previous network in Auburn, Alabama, one thing I learned was if you don't rally together all of the simple churches or house churches, then they get really inward focused. They lose the big picture. They lose the fact that they're part of a larger group. But man, Jim, sometimes I'm so jealous about you and people like you because you get those troops rallied together every Sunday, And so it's funny that we use different functions, and the grass is always greener on the other side. But but then you mentioned earlier, Jim, that you consider your rally point more Xcellerate than even the Sunday gathering. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of what we're talking about here, I mean, on Sunday mornings, we do take advantage of the opportunity on a regular basis to cast vision that this is the goal. This is where we're headed. It's not just about, I mean, we'll say things like, if you're looking for a place where, we just feed you and we never push you to step outside and begin to grow somebody else, then this is not the place for you. And so we're giving that vision all the time for folks. But I feel like that the Xcellerate gathering is really where you're almost, that's your Rich and Eli can kind of correct me. But is it platoons? That is your smaller unit that you're with? Like, that's where you really get together and say, this is who we are, and this is what we're doing today, and this is where we're headed, and this is our assignment, and we're all going to be accountable to each other for it. And so I just think that is such a powerful environment for Xcellerate for us. I do want to go back to one thing Eli said. I love this. When you're talking about feeding and you're talking about nourishment, when it comes to making sure that your troops, so to speak, are well fed and are nourished for the task ahead, that just in time disciple making of them is so important. And I think that when we talk about that in Ignite, a lot of times I think we're thinking of our whys, right? Like, we always say, well, what happens when I start having these conversations and we get in the next group? And Dan says, trust the Holy Spirit and just in time information, whatever comes up. But I feel like it's always outward focused. It's always, how do we pour into whys? And so I think that this is a great emphasis for us to be talking about this, because you're going to burn out the people who are out making disciples if you're not taking the time to know where they are and what they need and giving them just in time information in order to disciple them where they are. And so I just think, again, jumping the X, just kind of looking beyond and just thinking about, the harvest versus the laborers.
So good. Rich, tell us a little bit about where your rally points are in the Jesus Pattern Network.
Well, our Sunday gathering in the gym is a rallying point. That's been for almost 3 years now a place where it's the space, the environment connects us with the gym community. People sometimes find us through that community. I'm thinking about a gal right now. Her name is Sarah. She has a son, Max, and she came to one of these gym events, and there were some of our people there, and they were like, hey, come on Sunday. And she needed community. She's a single mom. You would have a conversation with her and just know that she appears to be very far away from God, but she keeps coming back to this gathering and asking all those questions. That she needs to be answered. I think Cheryl, my wife, was sharing that this past Sunday her question was, why are there so many denominations? Which is probably a question all of us have gotten at one time or another, which is a real hurdle for some folks when it comes to their journey to faith. Satan's always putting up all these walls to belief, but she had some ladies there that could try to answer that question and do so in a way that might not have been straight out of a seminary, but in a way that she could understand and to be helpful for her. So we do Xcellerate as well. That's it's a key launch pad. It's a key place where we're looking to inspire people to take that next step, fully stepping into their role and identity as an ambassador for Jesus. We've seen some second generation multiplication through that here in our city, and so yeah, those would be two of our points. Eli could probably share another as well.
Yes, one of the areas that's been fruitful, I think, in the last 6 months, we started a gathering once a month across the community where we gather people together who are like-minded when it comes to disciple making, to encourage, to share stories, to lift up, just prayer requests and to just encourage people to continue in the mission. And it's a little bit outside of our Sunday gathering, but it's another place where we regularly gather with people. I think the key to the gathering for this is you have to have a space and a process where people have access to each other. They're not so much just listening, but they have a chance to gather around, like you want to use the campfire, they gather around their little mini campfires and talk through things, to listen, to learn from each other. Another thing for me, Rich has mentioned, I've been attending a jiu-jitsu gym for about a year. I'm not very good at it, but it's a good place to be around people. And we've started a Friday morning gathering, and it's basically another place where guys get together. We would call it a kind of an accountability gathering, but what we're slowly but methodically doing is teaching people how to look back, look up, and look forward, where we can continue to learn where people are at, to be able to find ways to give them just in time discipleship, and then to try to equip them and encourage them to go back out. One of the gentlemen that we met through that process, his name is John. Rich mentioned him earlier today, and that's another success story of someone who had just come to faith, who really didn't have a place to go or have any idea what to do next. And through this process, and asking questions and learning and listening, we've been able to pour into him, and he seems to be moving in the right direction. He seems to get it and want it and build some capacity for it. And so those are just some areas and things that come to mind for me.
That's awesome. I was thinking as you guys were talking about two Ignite principles that we all already are familiar with, unless you're brand new to the network. One is, we all love that story of Dan when he first got married and he tried to grill hamburgers on the grill in the little city park place, and he didn't know how to use the coals, the briquettes, right? So I laugh every time I think about this, because I can see he and Debbie out there in the middle of the park, and he spreads all the coals out across the grill, but they're not touching each other, and he can't get them to heat up, right? He didn't recognize that in order for the heat to emanate from coal to coal, you put it in a pile. That's how they're designed to work. And that's how that's the principle of the briquettes is what he calls that. And that's how we as believers and Jesus people and missionaries are designed to work, that when we get together into one place, we kind of radiate heat to each other. And it heats up the whole pile of coals even hotter than it ever could be if we're all isolated and alone. And that's what I love about in the last a year and a half or so ago, we shifted our model of how we do hot coals and Ignite, and we went to mostly geographic cohorts. And we try on a monthly basis to get the hot coals together at least on a Zoom call if they can't get together in person. So just a reminder, and just connecting the dots to another principle of the hot coals. The other is power plausibility. This is a little bit of a different context and Justin mentioned this last week, Jim, or last month on our call when we were talking about Nolan, right? Like Nolan was invited to the campfire, and I mean, not calling Nolan an enemy, but if you're using the Civil War campfire, he would have been from the other side. Like he was not interested in Jesus. But the fact that he was invited to sit at the campfire with the soldiers was what was so transformational for him, right? And you saw that. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, but that's what we call in the Ignite network the power of plausibility. Like if you have a group that aligns with each other and you bring an outsider into that, then it confronts them in a way that they almost can't, they at least have to deal with it, right? So I'd use the funny example of, I have one of my college ministry when I was a college minister for a few years in Auburn, and one of my college students, I can't explain this, and I can't tell you what it's all about, so don't judge me, but he saw something that he perceived to be Bigfoot, like no question. And if it would have just been a random stranger trying to tell me that they had a 2-day encounter multiple encounters with a Bigfoot, I would just laugh about it. But the fact that I trust this guy and I love this guy and I know without a doubt that he would not lie to me, I am confronted with the fact that he saw something, right? And I got to figure out what he saw. And that's kind of the power of plausibility when an outsider comes into a group and the group is celebrating and sharing about Jesus and what Jesus has done for them. They at least have to be confronted with it. And they have to determine, what do I believe about this? And I think that's what happened with Nolan. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, I think something like that gives an environment for somebody to catch a vision for a whole different life, you know? And so, yeah, he might not have been on the team yet, but just being in that environment, he began to look around and go, you know, this is actually what my soul's been looking for. And so so it's really beautiful. It's like Justin was talking about it, a transformed community. When we look at Acts chapter 2, it's a place where people from the outside were looking and going, I think that's what I'm looking for. I think that's what I'd like to be a part of. And if you're welcomed into that and really get to immerse yourself in it and see it, it's a whole lot easier to sit on the outside looking in and go, yeah, you know, these people are all hypocrites or whatever you want to say. But when you really live life with them and they're just honest and they're open and they welcome you in, and you know, there's something magnetic about it. And obviously, you know, the gospel is a big part of that and the power of it to draw people in.
Yeah. Now that piece of the puzzle doesn't fit probably with a Civil War campfire analogy. You know, you're not going to bring your enemies to the camp, but it's a beautiful side what would you call that? A side effect of having really, really good campfire gatherings, right?
Well, but if you brought people in that maybe weren't enemies but were not sold on why they would want to be a part of it, you know, that might draw them in to the point that they say, you know what, I haven't been on board with this, but I feel like I need to get on this team. I need to go all in. It's time to commit.
Yeah, it's so good. So rich. The last thing I kind of want to touch on that I've been thinking a lot about is the rearming. So, you know, I don't know if this happened at night or in the morning at the Civil War campfire, but you got to be rearmed. You got to get some ammunition in your pocket, right, in your belt. And I've been thinking about what ammunition do we give disciple makers to go back to the mission field, and I think that really just kind of boils down to tools, you know. And tools is so funny. I did one of my primary tools I stole basically from Rich and Eli. Thank you guys for letting me steal that from you. And tweaked it a little bit for our context, but the 21-day challenge has been such an amazing tool for us. It's been in 20 years the best tool I've ever kind of embraced and utilized for multi-generational down the line disciple making, because it's super simple. Once someone's been through it a couple of times, they can easily do it. But sometimes the soldiers don't receive the ammunition they need until they've used it and recognized how powerful it is. I don't know how that fits in the military analogy, but for example, I've got I'm leading a group of 3 guys right now through the 21-day challenge. They're all around 35 years old, and they're like anti-tools. They're like, we don't like structure. And I'm like, just give it a try. I'm not asking you to embrace this for the rest of your lives, but just for 21 days, just humor me and walk through this. And why I want to give this to you is not even necessarily for you. I want you to get this under your belt, so when you have your first disciple, you'll have a pathway for your first disciple. But then they're like 14 days into it and they're all in. They're loving it. They're engaging. So yeah, sometimes we have to sell the right ammunition. They don't initially accept it, and especially young people who don't like anything that looks like a program or a system. So I don't know, but man, knowing the pathway, like I basically now lined out, if I have a new disciple, this is what I want them to do and what order I want them to do it in. So I know Eli and Rich, you guys, particularly Rich, you're a strategic, and particularly from military trained strategic, you are really big on pathways and tools. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, you know, in the military, you always have a pathway from the very beginning. As a new recruit, you know, your drill sergeant and your commander, they're not figuring out what your path is going to be to become a trained soldier. And you know, it kind of begs the question, like, why don't we do that as soldiers of the cross, followers of Jesus? So tools and having a pathway has been very important to us, and developing those tools and working on them and proofing them and then trying to improve them. Because really the tool is just if you would say, like, how could I best equip a soldier for the battlefield? You would say, I would want them to be full of the Holy Spirit and exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit. But the question becomes, like, how do we do that? How do you begin to help someone gain traction, begin to partner with the Spirit of God to bring about these fruits in their life? One that comes to mind would be self-control. What soldier does not need self-control out on the battlefield? Patience on the battlefield. You've got to have those things. Well, tools are just instruments to help us get there. And I think when I was in an established church, and now, we would talk a lot about disciple making, but we wouldn't have a clear pathway. And if we had the pathway, we wouldn't have simple tools. By simple, I mean we can lead someone through that tool, and then they can begin to use it themselves. So, I mean, that's probably been one of the hardest but most rewarding pieces of our journey. Me and Eli is working on these tools and learning as we've put them into practice. Like, how can we better help? And I can definitely identify with your story of those guys in their 30s pushing back on the 21-day challenge, because I just had one of our guys do that, and I was like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? You don't like this structure, but we're still having conversations. We're still moving through, and I appreciate you just sharing, how to sell that tool. We're not really selling a tool, we're selling something much bigger. So, yeah, that's it for me on that.
Cool. Eli, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking a couple different military aspects of things that might be applicable here. Military units spend a lot of time training for war, and they spend a lot of time doing what we would call battle drills, over and over and over, and train and retrain, so that when you actually go to battle, those things are automatic, and you just have to adjust off of those. The point being, it's so important for people to have gone through battle drills, continuous training and reminding and re-equipping, so that when you get in a tough situation, or maybe you got beat up pretty good and you're back at the campfire, or you're in the heat of battle, even you have the battle drills to go back on. You don't have to think a lot about them. You just react. And then you learn when you come back to the campfire and you come back from the mission, you do an after action review, figure out what went wrong, what didn't, how those battle drills, or a TTP is another thing, tactics, techniques, and procedures, another same term, or a different term for the same thing, how they worked and what we need to tweak in those. But I think those battle drills are so important so that you have something to tweak off of, because instead of just starting from scratch. I don't know if that makes sense, but all these tools are basically battle drills, if you will. They're TTPs that we have that we can use. The other thing I think it's important, I've learned my language means something. A lot of these are just strategies to tackle these scenarios that we're in. And so to help people understand, like, here's a scenario, we're going to give you some tools to choose from that might be contextual to where you're at and what you're doing. And the more tools you can have, the more you don't have to be structured. The more you can say, I have other things I can use. I don't have to just be on this one path is super important for people. For them to basically understand what the different scenarios they could run into, and here are different options. I think that's super helpful for people. And I've learned to use that myself. They're all tools, but the strategy remains the same. And the more we can exercise those tools, learn from them, tweak them, the more we can make some progress as we move forward out of the campfire and on to the next mission. I don't know if that's helpful.
Totally, and I totally agree. And I think what I'm learning, particularly with young people, is you have to the tools have to come embedded in a relationship. So, for example, one of those three guys, I mean, he's got tremendous potential as a network leader. Brand new believer, 2 years. He's known the Lord 2 years. He was so fired up. He's already read through the Bible, literally cover to cover 2 times in 2 years. He wants to read the Bible every year of his life. And I knew that he would probably like feel like a project if I started just feeding him tools. So I was traveling through Raleigh, which is where he lives. And I spent a whole day with him. I invested 2 hotel nights, financially, and just spent an entire day, like an 8 or 9 hour day with him. And we did all the other stuff first. Like I did roll call. Like I helped him stop some bleeding. I triaged him. I let him reflect on what the Lord was doing in his life. I made the environment really safe for him. So I went through these first 2 quadrants before I started, expecting him to receive these tools to be armed with. And he probably, I mean, actually, I think I first invited him to 21 Day Challenge like in November. And he was like, that doesn't interest me. But because I invested relationship in him for, an entire day, 2 nights, he was, this goes back to the power of plausibility, it's like it came through relationship. So I think that's the key on tools is introduce the tools at the right time. And if you introduce them before they trust you and they've been triaged and they've had a chance to see the big picture of where they're headed, then the tools just feel like a project to them, like a dry, dead project that they could get in any evangelical church in America. So the tools have to be introduced and nurtured through relationship. So, man, good stuff. I'm going to do a round in just a minute to ask for final thoughts so you guys can prepare for that. But before we do that, give them time to think about it. I just want to remind you that November the 10th and 11th will be the Ignite Retreat. We should be getting the Eventbrite details out in the sign-up form out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We're working on it right now. It's pretty complicated this year because we're tagging on right behind the Ignite Retreat, the Connect Region Retreat. So we got to figure out how to get those all working together. But go ahead and put on the calendar November 10th and 11th. It's our favorite time of year when it's really our rally point for sure, right? That's definitely our second and third quadrant for the whole network. So we're excited to see you there and get ready for that. And when you're gathering in your cohorts this month, kind of think through this material. Maybe ask each other, what are you doing to rally your team together? How are you getting your disciples all together as much as you possibly can in order to nourish them, prepare them, let them reflect on the next day's battle. And then remember, we're just doing this as a cyclical rhythm. Gather and scatter, gather and scatter. So talk about that when you gather in your cohorts. And that's what Dan would say to you probably if he was on this call. So, all right, last thoughts. Anybody want to jump in and give us kind of like your final thoughts for the episode?
A couple of things that I would think is first of all, when it comes to this concept of younger generations struggling with too much structure, that's one of the things I love about what we do. Although like in the military or whether it's in sports, there has to be enough structure, as Eli was talking about, to get you to where the tools that you're using are second nature. But one of the things that I love is that there's really no structure to it. It's that you know your tools and what the Holy Spirit leads as to when those tools are necessary. But the more that you use them, the more that it comes second nature to you. And so I love that about what we do. And then the other thing that I think is I love this quadrant because it's what brings intentionality to the whole rest of it. Some of y'all may have heard the old illustration of the lighthouse. And at first, the community came together to build a lighthouse because people were crashing on the rocks and they wanted to save people. But then over time, while they waited for people to be saved, they started playing cards and having clubs there and meetings, and it all became about them. And so we need to care for people. We need to love people. We need to help people through the junk that they're facing. We need to make sure that they're recharged and all that. All that's super important. But it's this quadrant that gets us back to saying, okay, but what's the purpose of all that? Why are we doing all that? It's so that we can go out and we can make disciples and make a difference, and see our entire cultures turned upside down, as we saw in the New Testament.
Richard, Eli, last thoughts.
Well, Jim was talking earlier about, how it's possible to burn people out. We can kind of pull them into a machine, and I guess my thought there is, Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." When we think about, this analogy of the campfire and going out into the battlefield and things like that, we can tend to think of disciple making and kingdom building as a very kinetic activity, with a lot of moving parts and energy and effort. And I think, just being reminded that, Jesus really calls us first to abide in Him, and that's where the fruit comes from. Being prayed up, our feet shod with the readiness of the gospel. I may not have quoted that exactly right, but being prepared with the tools that we have, and being ready to listen to people, and trusting God with the work. Otherwise, we can get ahead of God. We can burn ourselves out. We can burn our people out. But I think, it was alluded to earlier, is that Jesus said He would be with us always. He's the one that inspires the work. He's the one that does the work through us. And when we focus on that work, then in that way He'll bring it about in His timing.
I was just jotted down a few notes that I just wanted to bring up. The first one is a reminder to myself and everybody out there that disciple making is as much experiential as it is educational. If we're not building relationships, community, and accountability, then the educational piece doesn't really matter with people. And we have to be honest with people. We have to realize that it's a challenging environment, and we have to encourage people along the way. I wrote down, just to keep, because we're on the military stuff, people really don't need a drill sergeant in this. They need a battle buddy. And I think for us to think of ourselves as battle buddies is a lot better than a drill sergeant. They need us in the foxhole with them. They don't need us behind them directing traffic like a maestro, and they need us sitting beside them with the instrument playing with them. And we just have to lead by example. We have to make sure that we're living out these principles and trying to do these things ourselves, because nobody's going to want to follow you if you're not doing them yourself. And I would say a good leader, if you want to finish off the campfire analogy, okay, we've recouped, we've gained intel, we've resupplied, we've kind of updated the mission. Now we've got to get up off the campfire and go back out into battle again. A good leader is going to be the first one out the door, or first one off the bench back into the field, and people will follow that. So we just have to make sure that we're not being hypocritical. We're doing the things we need to do, so that people will want to follow and see us living out these same principles we're trying to use with others. So those are just some things that popped up in my brain as we kind of close out today.
That's so good. Being a disciple maker, not a disciple teacher, right? Which we've said so much the last 2 years. It's so easy to teach this stuff and train it and coach it, but we have to we have to model. That's how Jesus did. He didn't say, let me teach you how to make disciples. He said, follow me. Don't do anything. Just watch, just observe. There'll be a time where you'll be sent to the field, but there's going to be a season where you get to watch how I do it. And that's what so many people miss out on when they become disciple teachers. So awesome. Good stuff today. Thanks, guys, for joining us. It's fun to have 4 people on the call. went a little bit longer, but that's to be expected with 4 people. So blessings, guys, and thanks for attending the March IgniteCast, and we'll see you guys next month.